But then this way I got a scenario that came up with the cartoon seats and it was playing.
Okay, so up until now, what we've basically looked at is just what fear is and kind of understanding it from an individual perspective. Now we're going to take a look at something in the book that talks about resolving the fear cycle. And what this does is it takes a look at kind of the concept of you have individual fears that are your latent fears, your triggers, your projections, all of that stuff. And then you throw a spouse into the mix. And those things start feeding off of each other. And they just turn into a cycle. And it doesn't necessarily look like this picture of a cycle, but it looks like you sitting there watching a football game while she's in bed alone. Or you on one side of the couch while she's cooking by herself. It's kind of those elements that you just don't even want to talk anymore because it's an endless cycle. And so we're going to look at addressing that through 3 different ways. There are several tools and techniques in the book, but we're going to look at 3 of them. 1 dialogue, 2 repenting, and 3 prayer. Those are going to be the 3 elements we look at today. We're going to start with dialogue. And it's an interesting thing because Christy and I took this dialogue of this scenario that we just laid out about Dixie Chili. We took it deeper because we were forced to have a dialogue with Paul. Before we are able to come up and do a presentation like this, we meet with him and Carol a couple times, and we role play it and tell our story and do all of this. And Paul kept on asking Christy, but what are you afraid of? And she'd start it and then kind of go off a little bit, and he'd say, no, but what are you afraid of? And for the first time in my life, I think I understood my wife. Because we were forced to sit and not look at the scenario for the scenario itself, but for what fear was rooted underneath it.
So Paul asked me this directly, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. And what happened when he asked me again and again and again was I had to go down deeper. And I had to figure out, inside, deep down inside, why was I feeling isolated? Why was I so desiring to be considered in the family relationship? And it was because my parents were divorced, and it was because my mom had her own family. But really deep down, I remember when, I was 12, my parents got divorced. What was I? I was a teenager. I'm coming into my own identity. My body's changing. My relationships with people at school are changing. And I remember, the day the girl has to go for that training bra kind of thing. And I remember asking my mom, I remember she had a smirk on her face. And I was ashamed by asking her that simple kind of like coming of age kind of question. I remember the day that I wanted to wear makeup. And I tried something on because I just didn't go to her first. And I came down and asked for her approval. And she couldn't, some kind of dismissive kind of comment. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't that nurturing like, I love you, Christy. You're my daughter. You're beautiful. No matter what you do, you don't need makeup, or if you want to use makeup, let me show you. I didn't have those intimate moments with my mom. And my mom and my sister do have that. My mom and my sister is 17 years younger than I am. She's actually a 5th-year senior at UC right now. I love her to death. I get a chance to see her all the time. But when I told you earlier, when she was 2, when I was 16, she was just born, I was like, I'm not babysitting. They surprised me when they said that my mom was pregnant. I didn't know that was happening. So I was like, this is all your family, and this is nothing that I want to do. And my coping mechanism was to distance myself. But I look at that now, they talk daily. They FaceTime at least 3 times a day. They get along really well, and they fight, and all the above. And I talk to my mom maybe every 2 weeks that I remember. I love my mom. She's a wonderful person. But I don't have that affirmation. I don't have that doting. I don't have this, you are my precious daughter. And without that, I poured myself into work. I poured myself into men. I poured myself into everything else, trying to fill that hole. And so what I answered to Paul was, I want that intimate relationship. And I see that in you and Max. And I see that in my mom and my sister, and I'm surrounded by it, but I don't have it. And that was the big aha. And I'd never ever seen that parallel before. I'd never understood that. I never understood this longing in my heart and what that meant until that moment.
And for me, I see some of the things of the relationship with her and her mom, and it just angers me. It makes me so mad to see her mom dismissive of her. It makes me so mad to want to carry on a conversation about a new promotion that Christy got at work and her want to talk about Amber. It drives me crazy. And for the first time, I saw through my wife's eyes, she actually feels the same way when I'm doing something with Max as the way she feels when her mom and Amber are doing something. And it wasn't to hurt me. And I think that's the key part of this, was for the first time, I didn't project that into my own insecurity. I just took it for what it's worth. And I think I just understood my wife for the first time. In my part of the story, I've talked a lot about Max and my role and my responsibility in his life. And the thing you might not know is Max's mom and I divorced when he was 3. But when he was 5, she was in a car accident. And she lived, but she suffered a traumatic brain injury that they had to remove half of her brain. So she has spent the remainder of her life in rehabilitation clinics, living in her parents' basement, having 24-hour nursing care, being in intensive care, surgery after surgery after surgery. And all of these elements of being a dad, I take very seriously of being a dad, but I've tried so hard to fill this void of kind of being that nurturing mom for him too. And I know that I can't fill that, and so if I can just get her to be okay with it when I maybe take it a little bit to the extreme, that just makes me feel so much better. And especially as he has grown up and grown older, and hanging out with Dad isn't cool anymore. Going to the Reds game with Dad isn't fun anymore. And when he says, Dad, you want to go to Dixie Chili? It takes everything in me to say no. Because I want to value every second I get with him. And what this story was telling me was, my fear isn't necessarily just about, can I ever be good enough, or can I ever do the right thing, but am I losing my son? Am I losing this little window of opportunity to be a dad? Because the world is taking over and making decisions for him right now. And every second I get with him is a second I get to be a dad to him. And that is just so important to me. And the fear of losing that is just so deep. It is so deep in me. Sure.
So as I reflect on Jay's fear, right? Like, I don't have any jealousy. I don't have any jealousy that I direct toward them. You know, I give them their time because I understand it, I respect it, and I want them to have their time. Go to Reds game, go to Bengals game, and so on. But I take very seriously the mom role that I can uniquely play here. And the other element of this story was, I don't want to miss anything with Max either. Because he doesn't have his biological mom in his life on a regular basis. She lives 6 hours away. And the condition that she's in. But I want to be there with him. I want to give as much as I can. And sometimes I feel very inadequate. Because I don't have that biological connection necessarily with my mom or with my own kid that I can pull from, that I can, use experience to know what to do in that moment. So this, just talking The tool is dialogue, just talking and answering the question, so what are you afraid of? That's how we got here. It was a 10-minute, 15-minute conversation. It blew us away. But that whole fear cycle and the projection and everything went away like that. Because suddenly I was able to identify the very, very deepest root of my fear. Jay saw me more clearly and vice versa, and we communicate that. And I feel like His presence is made known, and we grow closer together. And if you remember the very first week of class, it's about that pyramid. It's about when God is present, you guys get closer as a couple because you're getting closer to God. And I felt that was a manifestation of that in that moment at Paul and Carol's table that night. It's awesome, and it feels so good. It feels so good. So, we have an invitation again to go back to your tables, and here's our challenge. So here's our challenge. Just like we thought we identified our fear until we asked the question, what are you afraid of? We want to invite you guys to go deeper. So we're going to do the exact same exercise with the same time allocation. Individually 5 minutes. Go back to that same situation and ask yourself, what are you afraid of? If there's something deeper, what is that? We will cue you. 5 minutes, talk to your spouse about that. Share if there's any new insights. And then we'll cue you again and 10 minutes back at your table and share if there's any other deeper insights that you have.
I'm going to throw a challenge out to the guys also. Maybe this applies to some of the ladies, but I know it applies to the guys online. Listen to your spouse to understand her, not to reply to her. I know Christy and my relationship changes when she's saying things and I'm listening to her just to understand her, as opposed to formulating what problem I'm going to solve in my head. I just challenge you guys as you go through this exercise to just simply listen to your wife.
And ladies, feel free to listen to your husband too.